I never expected a single event to unravel a lifetime of secrets, until that cold winter afternoon when I discovered I was not welcome at my own sister's baby shower. I had imagined that our family celebration would be filled with laughter, warm embraces, and joyful chatter as we anticipated new life. Instead, as I scrolled through Facebook that morning, I saw the invitation posted, vivid, sparkling, and glaringly exclusive. There was no place for me. And then later that day, when I finally arrived at the venue under a sky the color of regret, I saw my sister, Lena, standing alone near the buffet table, her face ghostly pale as if she had just witnessed a horror beyond imagining. I still recall the day vividly. For years, Lena and I had been close, at least that's what I had believed. Growing up in a bustling household with our parents, I always saw her as the golden child, the one who effortlessly attracted admiration and love. While I worked hard to earn my own way, Lena seemed to glide through life with an ease I envied. So when she announced she was expecting, the family was overjoyed, and plans for a lavish baby shower were set in motion. I, however, was never invited to those planning meetings or the online group chats. At first, I brushed it off as a minor oversight, thinking perhaps my sister simply assumed I would celebrate remotely. But the invitation on Facebook made it clear. I was deliberately excluded. That revelation stung deeply. I had always dreamed of sharing in the joy of family milestones, of being an active part of celebrations that stitched together the tapestry of our lives. Instead, I felt like an outsider, a ghost wandering the fringes of a family affair that no longer had any room for me. The hurt was compounded by a sense of abandonment, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Lena's joy was built on a foundation of secrets and lies. Determined to understand the reason behind my exclusion, I reached out to our mother, hoping for some clarity. Her reply was curt and evasive, a series of half-truths that only deepened my confusion. It was just easier that way, she'd said, as if my presence would somehow disrupt their perfect celebration. I tried to process her words, feeling the familiar sting of rejection. How could my own family, the people I had trusted most, decide that I was not worthy of sharing in this moment of happiness? I spent the rest of that morning in a quiet, painful reflection, questioning everything I had believed about our bonds. Later that day, I mustered enough resolve to attend the baby shower despite the invitation's silence. I drove to the rented banquet hall on the edge of town, the vehicle's headlights cutting through the early dusk as I approached a building decorated with garlands, pastel balloons, and a table laden with gifts and sweets. My heart pounded with trepidation. Every step toward the entrance felt like a march toward an inevitable confrontation, a confrontation with a family that had seemingly cast me aside. Inside, the atmosphere was festive. Relatives and friends mingled, chatting animatedly about the soon-to-arrive baby, the colors of the decorations, and the elaborate plans for the celebration. I hesitated at the doorway, feeling the weight of 100 unspoken questions pressing down on me. I was clearly the only one missing. Every other family member was there. I took a deep breath, determined not to let the exclusion define me, and stepped forward. As I moved through the crowd, I caught glimpses of murmurs and sideways glances. Some faces, previously warm with familial affection, now held traces of pity or discomfort. I felt the sting of isolation, each whispered comment a reminder that I did not belong. I made my way toward the refreshment table, seeking solace in the quiet clink of glasses and the soft hum of background music. And then I saw her, Lena, standing by herself near the buffet, her back turned to the room. Something in her posture struck me. She was tense, her shoulders rigid, and her face was ashen. I approached slowly, trying to hide the tumult inside me. "Lena?" I asked softly, hoping for a sign of reconciliation, a simple acknowledgement of my presence. For a heartbeat, she turned, and in her eyes I saw something I hadn't expected, fear or perhaps regret. Then she looked away, her expression unreadable. Before I could ask more, a sudden commotion at the far end of the room drew our attention. A woman in the crowd began to cry out, "There's been an accident." The sound sliced through the chatter like a knife. In that moment, the atmosphere changed abruptly. The festive air turned heavy with worry. I stepped aside with the others to see what was happening, and that's when I saw it. Lena, who had so far been quiet and reserved, was now rushing toward a side room with a look of terror. Her face had turned ghostly pale, and I could see her hands trembling as she fumbled with her phone. I followed her, my concern momentarily overriding the sting of exclusion. As I reached the doorway of the small conference room, I heard Lena's frantic whispers, "Help me, please, someone help me." Inside, the scene was chaotic. A relative was trying to calm her down, while others crowded in with worried expressions. I stayed at the back, unsure of what to do, my own feelings of betrayal momentarily forgotten in the face of genuine distress. Lena's eyes, wide with panic, scanned the room as she clutched her phone, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean for this to happen," she murmured. The air was thick with tension, and in that raw, unguarded moment, I realized that something far more complicated was unfolding than just a family slight. It turned out that the baby shower was not entirely what it seemed. In a hushed conversation later that evening, a cousin confided in me that Lena had been hiding a secret, one that had been weighing on her for months. Apparently, Lena had discovered that she was not pregnant at all. The baby shower, it seemed, was a desperate attempt by her to mask the painful truth and to preserve the illusion that everything was perfect. Her condition, both physical and emotional, had deteriorated under the pressure of keeping up appearances. The shock of the revelation sent ripples through the family, and Lena's ghostly pallor was not just a reaction to the incident, it was the visible manifestation of a deep-seated fear and despair. I felt a mix of emotions swirl inside me, sympathy for Lena, who was now caught in a web of her own making, and a lingering sense of betrayal over how I had been excluded from the very celebration that was now unraveling into chaos. I sought Lena's side, gently asking, "What happened?" Her eyes met mine briefly, filled with sorrow and regret, and she confessed that she had discovered she was not pregnant months ago. "I was terrified," she admitted in a trembling voice. "I panicked and I thought that if I pretended to be expecting, everything might work out. I didn't want to disappoint anyone, especially not Mom and Dad. But then the truth kept gnawing at me and I just couldn't hide it anymore." Her confession resonated with me in ways I hadn't anticipated. For so long, I had felt excluded from the family's festivities, my contributions and my presence taken for granted. And here was Lena, revealing a secret that explained so much of the tension I had sensed, but that had also plunged her into a spiral of fear and self-doubt. I realized that our family, with all its imperfections and hidden resentments, had been torn apart by unspoken pressures and the desperate need to maintain appearances. That night, after the baby shower ended in a flurry of confusion and hushed apologies, I sat alone in the quiet of a hotel room, my mind reeling from the events. I reviewed the day in fragments, the bitter taste of rejection at the shower, the shock of Lena's pale face, the secret she had finally unveiled, and I began to understand that this was not just a simple case of exclusion. It was a manifestation of deeper family dysfunctions, a tangled web of expectations, lies, and the desperate measures we sometimes take to avoid confronting painful truths. I spent the following days reaching out to various family members, trying to piece together what had led to such a catastrophic breakdown in our relationships. Conversations were difficult, filled with defensiveness and tears. My parents admitted that they had been pressuring Lena to maintain the illusion of pregnancy, believing it was the key to preserving our family's reputation. They had excluded me not out of malice, but out of a misguided desire to control the narrative, to keep everything perfect. The revelation stung, being cast out as if I were a disruptive element, when in truth I had only ever sought to share in the honesty of our lives. At the same time, I began to reflect on my own role within the family. I had always been the one who upheld responsibility, who tried to mediate conflicts and keep the peace. And yet, despite my efforts, I had been sidelined, left out of a celebration that was meant to be about love and new beginnings. The contrast between my unwavering commitment and the family's desperate charade was both heartbreaking and infuriating. I realized that I needed to reclaim my voice, to assert that I was not an afterthought, and that my feelings mattered just as much as anyone else's. Determined to bring about some semblance of truth and reconciliation, I arranged a series of one-on-one conversations with key family members. I spoke with my mother first, a woman whose gentle demeanor masked years of internal conflict. In a quiet, tearful conversation, she admitted that she had been overwhelmed by the fear of losing the family's reputation, and that excluding me had been a misguided attempt to protect everyone from the painful truth. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," she whispered, her voice breaking with remorse. "We thought that by keeping you away we could avoid the inevitable conflict, but we were wrong. You deserve honesty, and you deserve to be a part of our lives." Her words, though laced with regret, did little to mend the deep wound of rejection I had felt, but they were a start, a tiny step toward healing. I also reached out to my father, whose stoic silence had always been his way of coping with family strife. Our conversation was terse and filled with long pauses, but eventually he acknowledged that his actions had been driven by a desire to maintain control over the family's narrative. "I never meant to hurt you," he said reluctantly. "I thought that if you weren't there, things would be simpler." His admission was bitter and unsatisfying, an explanation that only underscored the fact that I had been cast aside because I was deemed too disruptive, too independent, too real. I realized then that our family dynamics were far more complex than I had ever understood, and that the path to reconciliation would be long and fraught with lingering pain. In the weeks that followed, I dedicated myself to rebuilding not only my relationship with my family but also my sense of self. I continued my work as a freelance graphic designer, pouring my emotions into my projects and finding solace in the creative process. I returned to painting, an old passion that allowed me to express the kaleidoscope of feelings swirling within me. Each brushstroke was a defiant act, a reminder that I was capable of creating beauty from the shards of betrayal and heartache. My blog, which I had started as a private outlet, blossomed into a public platform where I shared my journey of healing and resilience. The support from readers, stories of their own struggles with family secrets and rejection, reinforced my belief that I was not alone, that my pain was shared by many, and that we could all rise above the betrayals that once threatened to break us. Slowly, the atmosphere within our family began to change as well. At a subsequent holiday gathering, a tentative attempt was made to bridge the gap that had long separated us. I arrived with guarded hope, not expecting miracles but willing to try. The room was filled with a mixture of tension and sorrow as old wounds were laid bare once more. My parents, my siblings, even Lena, who had by then admitted the painful truth of her falsified pregnancy, gathered in a circle for a long overdue family meeting. Emotions ran high as we spoke of mistakes, regrets, and the yearning for forgiveness. I shared my perspective not with anger, but with a quiet strength born of my arduous journey. I have always wanted to be part of this family, to share in both the joy and the struggle, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor of vulnerability. But I cannot continue to be the scapegoat, the outsider, if we are to move forward. There were tears, there were apologies, and there were moments of raw honesty that, while painful, hinted at the possibility of healing. Yet even as we attempted to mend the fractures, I learned that forgiveness is not a switch to be flipped. It is a slow, deliberate process. I realized that I did not have to forgive all the actions at once. I could set boundaries, rebuild trust gradually, and choose to let go of the bitterness that had once defined me. I began to see that my true family was not just the one bound by blood, but also the network of friends, mentors, and even strangers who had supported me when I felt utterly alone. With time, I embraced the idea that I was worthy of love, of celebration, and that my worth was not diminished by the rejection of those who could not see my value. As the months turned into a year, I found that the initial shock and pain of that lonely baby shower had transformed into a catalyst for profound personal growth. I had learned to assert my boundaries, to demand honesty and respect, and to build a life that was defined by my own choices. I invested in my career, expanding my creative portfolio and gaining recognition for my work. I even started mentoring young designers, sharing the hard-earned lessons of resilience and self-worth. Every accomplishment, no matter how small, was a step away from the isolation of that fateful day and a step toward a future where I was truly valued. One evening, as I sat on the balcony of my apartment, its view of the city's twinkling lights a quiet contrast to the tumultuous past, I reflected on the long road I had traveled. The memories of that baby shower, the humiliation of being left out, and the shock of Lena's later revelation were still with me, but they no longer controlled my life. Instead, they had become part of my narrative, a reminder of the pain that had forced me to grow, and the strength that had allowed me to rebuild. I realized that every scar was a testament to survival, every tear a symbol of the battles fought and won. Today, as I move forward with cautious optimism, I know that my journey is far from over. I continue to nurture the relationships that matter, to invest in my passions, and to rebuild my sense of self every day. I have learned that family can be complex and imperfect, that sometimes betrayal comes from the ones we love the most. But I have also learned that my worth is not determined by their actions, but by the resilience I discover within myself. My story is one of heartbreak and healing, of being cast aside and then rising to reclaim my dignity. It is a story of transformation, of turning exclusion into empowerment and rejection into a stepping stone toward a future that is bright, authentic, and entirely my own. This is my story, a journey marked by painful exclusions, heart-wrenching betrayals, and the eventual triumph of reclaiming my place in a world that once seemed so cruel. I now know that even when your family leaves you out on a day meant for celebration, you have the power to rebuild, to find new definitions of love and belonging, and to create a life that reflects your true worth. I have learned that sometimes, the darkest moments pave the way for the most profound personal growth, and that from the ashes of rejection, a resilient, empowered self can emerge. And as I step confidently into each new day, I carry with me the unshakable belief that my destiny is mine to shape, and that no one, not even family, can ever diminish the light that shines within me.